Great. So I think this is a very appropriate panel to have after Lily and Nick, because, there were a lot of really big, interesting things that they talked about that have happened. And there are a lot of things that they were talking about that are going to happen that are pretty big. And all of those things require an intersection of regulatory and legal in order to make these products come to life. So I think this is a great follow-up. I've known Dax for 10 plus years and Alison for a couple now, so delighted to have you on this panel together. Why don't we start off, Alison, with an introduction, what you do and why you're here?
It's a very existential question. Alison Mangiero, I run staking policy and industry affairs at the Crypto Council for Innovation. And the group I run is called the Proof of Stake Alliance, where we try to bring together some of the leaders in the staking space and give them a voice here in the US and abroad on various issues of importance on the regulatory side.
Great. Thanks, Alison. And Dax?
Well, I like to think my tagline is I help make money better, faster, and cheaper. That extends to finances and other financial infrastructure as well.
Great. So, Dax, you've been involved in this space for some time. How would you summarize the regulatory state of crypto right now that we've had some months with this administration? I'm sure, Alison, you can answer as well. But starting off with you, Dax, kind of where are we right now in the regulatory state of crypto?
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, the chokehold is off. From the securities perspective and also in terms of like the banking infrastructure. I think those are probably the two biggest areas where I think we've had some impact. The Biden administration, turns out was fairly antagonistic towards the crypto industry, and the Trump administration obviously is pretty favorable towards it. So we have received a number of clarifications from the agencies. Like there was an executive order from the White House that just said, we intend to make crypto a real powerful industry, that we want to promote dollar-backed stablecoins globally. There's been a big push to try to get some market infrastructure legislation passed that hopefully will clarify some of the open questions and maybe close the gap, so that after this administration, there can't be really like a whiplash again, like from each administration, being able to decide what the policy is and the outcome is, but to actually get this clarified from a legislative perspective. And then the SEC has released a number of like statements on things like meme coins and mining, proof of work mining. Clarifications, so we've got a fair amount of guidance out of the SEC. We have a token task force at the SEC that's developing a lot of answers to like 49 questions that Commissioner Peirce posed on the policy side. The Office of the Comptroller of the OCC, Comptroller of the Currency, and Federal Reserve and FDIC, they've all released revised guidance that said banks, you can and should play in this space. And that's, like a big difference from what we had a few years ago, where actually because of the crypto and the fintech collaborations, a lot of those banks were put out of business, frankly, right? So I think, to sum it up, I think we have more institutional runway. We have a lot less, mother may I on the securities side, which hopefully unlocks a lot of that innovation, including a lot of innovation that's been trapped for the better part of 8 or 10 years here, or it's been sent overseas, but now that innovation development can come back in the United States. So that's kind of how I'd summarize it.
And do you agree with that assessment, in the shift that you've seen the past few months?
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think the short answer to your question, what's going on the regulatory side is a lot. And so I think for those of us who have been playing in this space for a while, where before it was a lot of education, kind of keep your head down, now has very much been the time to act. And so I think we're kind of firing on all cylinders, trying to engage with Congress as they're trying to both get a stablecoin bill passed, market structure, as you said, introduced. I think with SEC, we've seen more good faith engagement in the past 4 months than we have in the past 4 years. So a lot going on, and have to kind of continue to stay engaged.
I wonder if,
Can I weigh in real
Yeah,
quick? So
sure.
also that's sort of on a policy and from like a regulatory perspective, but also from a judicial perspective as well, right? Like that a lot of the suits that the SEC have brought have been dropped, right? So less litigation in the space on the federal side. But then we also have now seen like some of the state regulators starting to think they need to police. Like maybe the SEC has gone too far to the other end of the spectrum. And so we have like the Attorney General in Oregon, for instance, trying to quote unquote fill a void that was left by the SEC. So I think we still have a complex legal system and a federal and a state system, both in terms of like legislation, judicial matters, but also like our dual banking system. Like even in our proposed legislation, you've got these questions of stablecoin issuers and do they need to be federal and what about the states, right? So there's it's still complex, but there seems to be a way to navigate most of that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. And even at the state level, we track all of the pieces of state legislation that have been introduced. And just since January, it's been nearly 300 pieces of legislation on crypto have been introduced at the state level, whereas last year it didn't even come close, right? So just to further your point, I think there's a lot of action just kind of across the board.
Yeah, I guess my next follow-up question, maybe do some regulatory slam poetry. Alison, I'm going to put you on the spot because one of the things I think is so fascinating about the space is, we had some validators up here going into the ins and outs of all the esoteric things they have to deal with. And I don't think people truly understand the amount of constituents there are. And we talked this, judiciary, legislative, but even within that. So just, word by word, Congressperson, Senate, who are all the people when you think of this regulatory engagement, either people or wings of government that you interact with, just in a list?
Sure. So I would say if we're starting with Congress, of course, we're engaging on both the House and the Senate side, and that's both in key committees of jurisdiction. So House Financial Services, Ag, Senate Banking. Of course, now you also have some of these subcommittees that have been created, like the subcommittee on digital assets that Senator Lummis chairs. So there's concrete engagement with those offices, but you also want to make sure that all of the other members of Congress are at least educated to a point so that when these bills come up, they feel like they're empowered to make a good decision. So I think we've just seen this with the stablecoin bill. You had, of course, a lot of Republicans who were supportive, but a number of Democrats on the Senate side in the cloture vote the other day who were incredibly supportive. And that's the impact of a lot of people pounding the pavement, right? So that work will continue apace, I think. So there's, of course, Congress. The regulatory agencies, which we mentioned, so engaging with SEC, specifically the crypto task force, newly created crypto task force, but also the many divisions there, CorpFin, trading and markets, engaging where we can, engaging with the CFTC, with the administration directly, and then, of course, the states, and that's just U.S. So a lot of people, I guess I would say, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like an awful lot of people.
Very poetic, by the way.
Thank you.
So Dax, Solana staking ETF, we're going to be talking a little bit about that a little later, but why is it taking so long? I mean, there's, granted it took 10 years and some litigation for a Bitcoin ETF, but what's the hang up?
Well, first disclaimer, I'm not a securities lawyer, although I certainly helped a lot of clients who've been dealing with securities issues. But I guess I'd say, first of all, like we have a new chair who's only recently been installed, right? And there's a lot going on, right? And so I'm not sure that it's taking too long. I mean, it's probably taking about the right time. There are a number of applications on all sorts of other tokens as well, right, that have been submitted, and so there's just kind of a backlog. But these like the public markets for equities is a very different market than a retail market for like spot trading of cryptocurrencies, right? That the regulators need to make sure that there's nothing bad that's going to happen on their watch, that this is safe. And I mean, if you look back at all of the commentary from the SEC about like market surveillance and minimizing fraud and making sure that, that the infrastructure is robust and built out, there's a fair understanding about like Bitcoin, that those same considerations I think are relevant here on with Solana, and then beyond that, there's just a question of the staking too, right? Like staking adds another component to it, but so there's things to sort through, but and actually by approving an ETF, I think there's like essentially a position taken by the SEC about the underlying asset not being a security.
Yeah.
And so each one of these has a slightly different configuration in terms of its validation platform and even the way that Solana works compared to Ethereum, even though that's another proof of stake asset, right? Like there's differences, I think probably better differences or that favor Solana. So I'm sure that it's coming, but I guess say this is the way the system works, and I don't know if this is taking too long.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would add there is, and I know this is everyone's favorite topic, but outside of some of the issues with SEC or just the backlog is some of the issues around tax and structuring. And so I think even if we solve some of the issues, we figure out why, even the issuers of the ETH ETFs from last year were told to remove staking from those products. We kind of get a better understanding of that. They become comfortable with that in a Solana ETP. We still have to solve for these tax and structuring issues. So I think engaging with Treasury on that, also engaging with Congress, getting folks to talk to one another and getting staking hardwired into some of these structures is something that's going to be important as well.
Yeah. And I guess I'd say, I mean, since I have the pleasure of working with Marinade on, for instance, like Marinade Select, that even like Marinade Select is an innovation in staking that allows for, KYC validators, known validators and participants, right? Like that at least, there's a lot of thought put into, institutional grade staking, right? That so it's another, maturation point in staking that I think will help the conversation.
Great. So Alison, you're kind of unique in that, there's a few of us in this world who we're full-time staking. So I think that's great. You fit in well with the Marinade team because we're all staking all the time. So Proof of Stake Alliance, you're the executive director. What are the sort of repeatable misconceptions that you have to educate people on about staking? Because it's one thing to talk about Bitcoin and mining, but staking is a whole other thing.
Yeah, I'm a hit at cocktail parties. I think the main thing that we've been kind of hammering for years is the difference between staking and lending, because I think especially on the regulatory side and in the previous administration, they were kind of trying to draw a straight line from lending to staking, when in fact those products are very different, especially if you're conducting staking, the way we would, and according to the industry principles that PoSA, the Proof of Stake Alliance, has set out. So I think that's one of the things that we continually try to hammer home. This is not just passive income. You're securing a blockchain network. It's actually incredibly important to the functioning of these networks that people stake these tokens. So that's one thing that we try to hammer home. And then I would say the other thing is there are a lot of people, I think that time is coming to an end now, but historically, there have been folks in the crypto space that have called things staking that are not actually staking. You're locking up your token to do something, but not necessarily securing the network or engaging in staking worthy of the name. So we've had to go in and say, no, this is not just yield farming. This is actually incredibly important for these reasons. So I would say those are the two biggest misconceptions.
Interesting. Anything you've come across as misconceptions?
Well, I guess I also would say like there's not just one size fits all, right? Like you've got the liquid staking tokens, and then you have native staking, and then you have native staking on something like Ethereum, and then in Solana you can split the delegation from the custody, right? And so just like the ability to just park your SOL with your custodian and then be able to pull back your delegation at any time without any smart contract risk. Like that's a really important technological difference. And it varies from blockchain to blockchain, and there will likely be more innovations on these blockchains.
Yeah, it reminds me when we were down in DC, like what was it, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and I was in the room, and probably the only company that's Solana staking only, and there was conversations relevant to only Ethereum.
Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe we need to start the Proof of Solana staking alliance, but that would be even more esoteric. But to your point, Dax, I think in some ways, not that we could standardize, but our technology and complexity does not do us any favors, because there's a lot of like yes ands or buts, and you can't just generalize a lot of like staking. There are nuances, as you're saying.
If I could give a shout out to the Proof of Stake Alliance. So more than 2 years ago, you put out an analysis of the securities issues on liquid staking in particular, which is one piece of guidance that hasn't come out of CorpFin at the SEC, right? And so I guess I would say that as people are trying to figure out, like, well, how do you address that? But this might be one of the documents, that to look at for some I think still relevant thought processes.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, to the point about technological nuance and the space kind of continuing to innovate, those white papers that we put out on liquid staking 2 years ago, which were the first kind of analysis under the securities and commodities laws and also federal tax law, there have been so many innovations in the liquid staking space since then that now we have to go back and update it. We're working on restaking papers, to your point about nuances between different chains, getting into the weeds on that. We're doing some work on MEV now. And again, as you know, that's very different on Solana versus Ethereum. And so I think that work kind of needs to continue apace, and we need to kind of make people aware of it.
I think that, personal observation, the good news is, I think when I think about the first time I ever met with a regulator, which was probably 10 or so years ago, it was like, what is Bitcoin? And when I think about some of the conversations now at the SEC, they're engaged, they would be able to be in this room talking with validators, and thanks a lot to the work that you've done. It's a never-ending effort, but I'm cautiously optimistic that there's a continual upskilling and knowledge updating on the behalf of our regulatory partners.
Well, I think you just can't ignore the size of the market either, right? Like, what I'm fond of saying is, when I first started working on these issues in 2019 and we went in to talk to the regulators, it was about $19 million in terms of total value locked. Today at the peak, it was $600 billion. I think we're having very different conversations just because the sheer size of the market, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So bringing back the Dan Albert question that I also put to Jim, 3 years from now, I sort of understand the argument or the observation. Things are just getting started for the new administration. So, but what does the state of the regulatory and operating environment look 3 years from now?
Well, look, I'm an eternal optimist, and I've been working in this area for a while. But like, I do think that we're going to get pretty helpful legislation. It's not going to be perfect. There's some little bit of like buyer beware, like what's happening with the MiCA in Europe, and actually that comprehensive legislation actually causes maybe some more confusion. So like, I really hope we have kind of a hands-off approach, but like if we can get into a market structure bill, some clarifications about which things are securities and not, some sort of a process, and deal with secondary markets, and then clarify the roles of the agencies here, right? Then 3 years from now, it's not going to be as unpredictable there. So I do think we're going to get more legislation. I think we're getting some clarification through the judicial channels as well, and which clarifies things like initial issuances and secondary trading, which I think makes the U.S. a more attractive area. Everybody I've talked to, these internet-based protocols are by definition international, and about everybody I talked to around the world still wants to come back to the U.S. The U.S. is still the most major market, right? And so like I would like to think that we've gotten over the blockade here, and that we were going to see a lot of innovation, and we can institutionalize, and not only institutionalize but also further decentralize and allow for peer-to-peer unregulated transactions as well as institutional transactions for regulated financial institutions. We're going to get both.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why Solana has their event here this week is to bring that, accelerate that innovation. What about you, Alison, 3 years from now?
If you're an optimist, I'm a realist. And what I would say is what's happening 3 years from now largely depends on what happens in the next 6 months. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, we just had an election, but people are going to start focusing, especially on the House side, on the next elections by the end of this year. And so I think this is a hot topic right now. This is kind of our time. And so I think the push to get stablecoin bill done, get as far as we can on market structure on the legislative side, get some good guidance and rulemaking out of the agencies. I think the time really is now. And if we can achieve a lot of that in the next 6 months, then I think we're in a very good place 3 years from now. Whether or not that happens, I think is a very open question.
Yeah, and this topic came up when we were in DC, the importance of the legislative branch doing its job and putting these into laws so that, so that they're there when things inevitably change.
And add one thing, I think it's also going to be interesting to see what the institutions themselves do, because as the large trusted financial institutions launch products and offerings in the service, stake, or whatever they're going to be doing, custodying, that influences, I think, what the legislators do and the regulators do, right? Like these are often regulated by federal and state agencies. And if the institutions have gotten comfortable with it, I think that influences the policy outcome as well.
Great. Well, thank you both for everything you do. I clearly need to upgrade my shoe game. This is my takeaway from the panel. I've been going back and forth.
You have one assignment.
Yeah,
for the
I
next
know. But thank you for everything you do for the industry and for staking and for your insights today.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.